Alright guys, so everything is coming full circle. We all saw this coming. You can run, but you can't hide from reality. And this is a lesson that Argentina is starting to learn in real time. Before Milei became president, he was pretty vocal about relations with China. He didn't want to deal with communist regimes, and he was prepared to only trade with the Western world. And let's recall what Milei said about Beijing because it's really wow. It really tells you how extreme his views were.
¿Y con China?
Yo no haría negocios con China.
Pero es el segundo socio comercial de la Argentina, palo a palo con Brasil. Si rompemos relaciones con China sería una tragedia macroeconómica, Javier.
No, es falso que sería una tragedia macroeconómica. Podríamos hacer transacciones con el lado civilizado de la vida.
¿Cuál es el lado civilizado de la vida?
Occidente. O sea, yo, digamos, no hago transacciones con comunistas.
Aunque sea la segunda superpotencia mundial.
No me importa. Digamos, yo no negocio mi moral a cambio de dinero.
However, reality bites. You can't run an economy without trading with the Chinese. Argentina is facing two big issues that can't exclude China's economy. Firstly, we must talk about inflation. While it's true that CPI will slow to 31% in 2025, the print is still at 200% in October for the year. Prices are still out of control. People are paying more for the essentials, especially imported goods. Chinese imports are still very necessary. It's one of the few ways to keep the cost of living down. Now, good luck trying to lower your costs with Western goods. It's just not going to happen. But let's ask ourselves one big question. Why is inflation coming down so fast? Maybe it has something to do with collapsing demand in Argentina. Because of Milei's big job cuts, people are left with fewer jobs. Yes, a ton of those jobs were from the government, so he has indeed trimmed a lot of the fat and he has drained some of the swamp. But the effects are undeniable. Argentina is in recession. The economy contracted by 1.7% in Q2, and this pushes the country deeper into recession. It's a big reason why inflation in Argentina is dropping. Domestic demand is falling. People just don't have enough money to spend. Even though Milei is a big fan of the G7 economies, he knows where his bread is being buttered. He needs cheap goods from China to continue flowing in. And more importantly, he wants to export more to Beijing. And that's why Milei is running back to China. He's going to meet President Xi on the sidelines of the G20 summit. And this is a very big departure from his assassin comments and how he prefers to work with the US. As much as Milei met with Trump and Elon at Mar-a-Lago, he's accepted one big fact, that he still needs Beijing. Chinese trade and investments bring more to the table than vague promises from the West. One is a tangible benefit that you can hold, the other is just a hope and a dream. A big part of Milei's Trump support is getting a new loan from the IMF. Argentina already owes over $40 billion in debt, and they simply need more money. And as we know, the US has a big influence and voting power in the IMF. So the plan is to get Trump's help to secure a new tranche of funding. The desperation is starting to build up. Milei is talking with Wall Street banks, including JP Morgan, to access a $2.7 billion lifeline. Milei will have to give collateral to the banks to access this repo facility for only 3 years. The problem here is the amount of collateral that needs to be pledged. Argentine peso bonds are still toxic. They also don't have enough physical gold as well, and because the economy is deep in recession, we can expect the terms of the deal to benefit Wall Street much more than Milei. Argentina, well, they're basically trying to balance between the US and China. Milei wants Trump to convince the IMF to loan him more money, and on the flip side, he also wants China to continue their $5 billion swap line. However, the desperation goes far beyond just swap lines. As much as Milei loves Trump, he probably can't deny one simple fact. The US is going protectionist and Argentina could be a victim of Trump's global trade war. China is the world's biggest food importer. In 2023, imports hit an incredible $140 billion, and that's an increase of 3% from the previous year's levels. Trump's 10% tariff on Argentine exports could decimate their economy, and the only way to counter this is to cozy up with China and divert exports to them. As the US continues to decouple with China, this is going to be a lifeline for Argentina's farming industry. If Milei doesn't strike while the iron's hot, he'll lose Chinese demand to Brazil. China gets the majority of their corn imports from Brazil. It's over 40% and more than US supply. But imports from the US are very unstable. If Beijing gets into a full trade war with Washington, they could retaliate hard on US farmers. They will stop buying US corn and wheat. And this is critical revenue that Argentina needs to rebuild their economy. At the end of the day, it's all about trade. The only way to drag Argentina out of a recession is to increase GDP by exporting more. It's the only playbook Milei has left. The good old fashioned strategy for emerging markets. You export your way out of a crisis. Your domestic economy has collapsed, so you have to look outwards. Argentina heading back to China is emblematic of a bigger trend. The entire Latin America is being transformed by Chinese trade that even the West can no longer deny. The Wall Street Journal captures this perfectly. Decades of US indifference have led to this outcome. While Biden was busy funding Ukraine and fighting Iran, China has cemented their lead in South America. Beijing has been building roads, they've been building ports, power stations, and mining facilities throughout the region. And these are infrastructure countries need to grow their economies. It's staggering if we look at the transformation of Latin America. In the 2000s, the biggest trading partner of the region was the US, not even a hint of Chinese influence. But 2 decades later, the map is almost red. Countries from Chile to Brazil, they're all trading massively with the Chinese. This is what happens when you try to play global hegemon. You dilute your efforts, you waste a ton of money, and now you have lost Latin America to China. The consequences are going to be very severe. It's going to dilute America's trade war efforts against China. By building up Latin America, the Chinese, they have more or less guaranteed a huge chunk of humanity who are receptive to trade with them. Let's just take the battle between Tesla and BYD to illustrate where China is focusing their efforts. It kind of tells you where Chinese companies see the future of global demand. Tesla in red is building their factories in the West, their facilities in the US, Germany, and of course China as well. Everyone has a factory there. But look at where BYD in blue is building their plants outside of China. Their production in Indonesia, Thailand, and Brazil is coming really soon. This footprint tells us where they are pivoting to and where future demand is. It's the good old hockey code. You go to where the demand will be 5 or 10 years down the road. Europe is finished, while the US is going to isolation mode, so Latin America is China's big bet. A big pushback is that Latin America, the people there, don't have enough money to spend. US or EU consumers are richer and they can spend more. Now, this might be true on the surface, but it doesn't matter if you can establish market dominance. Cornering the majority of sales allows you to make more while lowering your prices down. Just take a look at BYD's lineup. The BYD King, which is a sedan, is sold for around $16,000 in China domestically, but in Brazil, it retails for around 31 grand. So the profit margin is still enormous. Might not be as much as selling to the EU where prices are more than double, but it's still very generous. It's important to realize that China's model is nothing new. They go in and they swallow up an entire market and then they price low. Over time, when the economy grows and people become richer, they will raise their margins and earn more. It's the same thing companies like Uber and Lyft they are doing. Just that China does it on a global scale using manufacturing. It's not some big conspiracy. For Latin America, this is an incredible chance to build up their industries. Chinese investments come in, what do you get? More jobs are created, and all the technology gets shared around. While the US builds military bases around the world, China understands the future lies in the ability to facilitate global trade. And to secure global trade, you need to build and control a ton of ports. 7 of the top 10 global ports are located within China, and this tells you the scale of trade that's being conducted. There is no Western country on the list. The US and Europe are missing. They have lost the ability to build ports around the world as well. Meanwhile, President Xi he just opened a 1.3 million megaport in Peru. Even a blind monkey can see what's happening in America's backyard. China is sanction proofing their trade with the entire continent, and it's going to get really messy and complicated for the US to ban trade between Latin America and Beijing now. The logistics also makes complete sense for Peru's megaport. It cuts transportation time by almost 30%. from an original 35 days voyage down to just 25. Goods between Latin America and China will reach faster and costs will come down as well, and that improves trade. And look at which port the new route bypasses. It avoids going through the Panama Canal and the port of Los Angeles, and these are fewer points of vulnerability for the Chinese trade. The megaport is an enormous threat to US trade and sanctions. Suddenly, your threats become quite empty. In addition to this, if China trades more with Latin America, which currency do you think will be used? Will there be more dollar transactions, or will China prefer to use bilateral currencies like the Chinese RMB? It doesn't take a Harvard graduate or rocket scientist to figure this one out. China's presence in Latin America is one big de-dollarization campaign. The USD will lose even more influence in global trade. And there's no fire without smoke here. We know the US is angry about this loss of influence. Trying to play catch up with China will be quite impossible for Trump. He wants to bring production back to the US. Let's not forget about all his campaign promises. So it's going to be quite unthinkable for him to invest in Latin America. It will be going against his own campaign of investing back in the US. And if you can't use the carrot, the only method left is to use the stick. A Trump advisor is floating the idea of tariff punishments once again. Any Latin American goods shipped from Chinese ports could face a 60% tariff. If Argentina or Peru uses the Changi port and ships to LA, they might face a big import tax. Obviously, this idea is not going to work. It would just increase trade between Beijing and South America. And whoever cooked this idea up needs to go back to school. We know that sanctions don't work long term. It didn't work for Napoleon against the British, it didn't work on Russian oil, and it definitely will backfire against China. So the US is severely behind the 8 ball in Latin America. To displace China, Washington will have to invest hundreds of billions, maybe even trillions, and I don't think Trump will be interested in spending money down south. But let me know what you think. Can Argentina juggle both the US and China effectively? And can the US get back into Latin America? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.